So we are going to talk about where the tradition of making the cheesecake party started. Not specifically cheesecake, but all dairy products. Why is it specifically connected with the holiday of Shavuot? Of course, the joke is as old as you and me that every Jewish holiday is surrounded or surrounds itself by food. And it's true. By and large, each different holiday has a food element incorporated within it. And it's not by coincidence. In the Code of Jewish Law, it says quite clearly that food and wine make a person happy, joyful. We're not talking about in a way that is gluttonous or totally self-indulging. But the reality is that when we are properly fed and we eat well, we are in a positive mood and we can be more productive. And so on the holiday, when we're trying to put ourselves in a good frame of mind, we eat well. Also, food is a way of bringing people together. As we share food, everyone comes together and joins in. And the holidays are an opportunity for us to take a break from work and enjoy each other's company. Hanukkah, we've got latkes. Purim, we've got hamantashen. If you look at Rosh Hashanah, there's carrots or round challahs. Sukkot, and Sukkot doesn't really have a special food per se, although it's encouraged to eat meat. Pesach, of course, we have matzah, and Shavuot, we have cheesecake or dairy products. And the question is why? So there are many different explanations that are brought. One of the most basic ones is that when the Jewish people received the Torah on Mount Sinai, they received many new laws, customs, and traditions that they had not been aware of previously. Of course, before they received the Torah, they did get a couple of different concepts like circumcision, the establishment of a lunar calendar, and some other tidbits. But by and large, people did not really know what the Torah had in store for them until they received it on Mount Sinai. One of the big changes was dietary restrictions, and especially in the area of meat, because meat has to be prepared in a very specific way. Only certain animals could be eaten, and they had to use a very special knife that had to be sharpened to a point, and therefore that required extra studying and tutelage beyond just open a book, read it, and go and put it into action. And as a result, the Jewish people really had to take a step back and switch their diets to dairy only until they could bring themselves up to speed. As a result, in commemorating that day, we eat dairy products. But that's not the only explanation that's brought. There's also an explanation that's brought that they received the Torah on Shabbos. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to slaughter an animal. Not allowed to. So therefore, they couldn't eat meat on Shabbos, whether they were learned or not learned. That's another explanation that's brought. Some people look to explain that it's connected with the number 40. Chalav, which means milk, and is essentially the term used to refer to all dairy products in the Torah. Chalav is the numerical equivalent of 40. Now 40 is intrinsically connected with the entire story of the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. As we know, Moses went up the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. He came down, he went back up after he broke the tablets to get a second pair, also for 40 days and 40 nights, and so on. And there's actually another interesting connection to the number 40. From Moses until Rabbi Ashi, the man who wrote the oral tradition, compiled the Talmud, is how many generations? 40. Very good. So again, we see how the number 40 is intrinsically connected with the Torah being given to Moshe over a 40-day period and ultimately transcribed from written law all the way through the oral law, which was eventually written in 40 generations. And 40 is dairy, so therefore another reason why people might eat dairy on the holiday. Now, there's even another reason, and this one is really, really interesting. Moses is born on the 7th day of the month of Adar. Okay? And on this day, he's born. If you remember the story, he's born in a time when all baby boys, Jewish baby boys, were killed immediately. So after he's born, he's put into the Nile River in a basket. Sure enough, his sister waits from afar to watch what will happen, and the princess, Batya, Pharaoh's daughter, sees the baby boy and decides she's going to adopt him. But nobody will nurse the child. So what is she going to do? She has to find a wet nurse, and she starts looking for a wet nurse, but Moses will not nurse from any Egyptian woman. And so Miriam, the sister, sees what's taking place. She runs out and says, hey, I recognize this boy. Why, I think he's Jewish. Why don't you try with a Jewish woman? And she ends up bringing her mother. And so Moses gets to live with his mother for a few years until he finishes nursing. And then he eventually is brought back to the palace. What a beautiful story. Now, the 7th of Adar till the day of Shavuot is how many months? Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. 3 months. And those 3 months was the 3 months that he stayed in his home until they put him in the Nile River. So the day that they put him in the Nile River and he was ultimately discovered by Batya the princess was the day of Shavuot. What would eventually be the day of Shavuot. Again, another miracle connected with the holiday of Shavuot and connected with dairy or milk. Because of that, he was able to be brought up in his home because of the entire story connected to nursing. So there's constantly a bunch of different ideas and different names, and they all have some special significance in and of themselves. But tonight, we're going to take all of those stories, all 4 or 5 different stories, and we're going to put them aside. Tonight, we're not going to talk about any of those reasons, and I'm going to tell you why. None of those reasons are really substantial enough, in my opinion, to create an entire eating regimen, a core, fundamental tradition of the holiday, till this very day. So the Jewish people didn't eat this or they didn't eat that. It's still not intrinsically connected with the holiday itself. The giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. As a natural occurrence, they couldn't eat meat, but that's not an essential connection to the holiday. You follow me?
So far.
There is none of those stories, I mean, the numerical equivalent, they're all nice stories, but none of them really have an essential, integral connection with what the holiday represents, the giving of the Torah here to the Jewish people. So, begs the question, how can any of these reasons be strong enough for us to create such a fundamental tradition? And it is a fundamental tradition, and you know that by the fact that all Jews, anyone observing the holiday, tries to eat dairy. It's not just Ashkenazic or Sephardic or Hasidic groups. Everyone, really by and large, eats dairy on the holiday. So this is not just a familial custom. This is by and large accepted across the entire Jewish people. So there's another story. And this goes back even before the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. Even before the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, you go back to an episode that happened with Abraham. What happened with Abraham? It says that Abraham is sitting in his tent, and he picks up his eyes, and he sees 3 men are standing there, right? And he saw and he ran towards them from the entrance of the tent. It's in Bereshit, in Genesis, chapter 18. And he prostrated himself on the ground and said, "If I have only found favor in your eyes." So he sees 3 people coming. He recognizes that these are not just 3 regular people, and he's right. They're 3 angels. And he prostrates himself in front of the ground, and he tells them, "Why don't you come in? I'll give you something to eat." Right? Story sounds familiar, right? 3 angels, each one's coming for a different reason, a different task. Okay. So they comes in, and here's what happens. Abraham goes to the tent, and he tells Sarah to take out some meal, some cornmeal, and some flour, and to knead and make cakes. And then he runs to the cattle, and he takes out a calf that's really tender, and he goes to prepare the calf, and then he takes out some cream and some milk, and he prepares that, and he gives it to the men as well. Okay. So, interesting story. Abraham serves meat, right, from a calf. He serves them cream, all these wonderful things, and he's extremely hospitable, and after the meal, they bless him, and he has a child, and so on and so forth. What's the problem with this story? What does he serve them in the meal?
I was going to say it would be the milk and meat thing, but it really hasn't been handed down, as you just said so far, so it wasn't an issue yet.
Maybe, maybe not. All right, so it might be meat and milk, but Herzl says it's not a problem because the Jews haven't received the Torah. True. However, it says in the Talmud that our father Abraham fulfilled the entire Torah. How do I know this? Because it says, Abraham listened to my voice. He guarded my protective prohibitions, my commandments, my decrees, and my teachings.
But they had the milk, they had to wait for a while for him to prep the beef, so there was a waiting period.
Maybe, maybe not. 6-hour waiting period? Who knows?
Well, it takes a long time to slaughter that cow and get everything done.
Could be.
With the sharp knife and everything just right.
Could be. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're not. So we see right away, Abraham served at the meal. He served meat and he served milk. Is it a problem? Is it not a problem? Did the angels do something right? Did they do something wrong? They actually did something wrong. And 400 years later, they get admonished. Do you know when they get admonished? On what day do the angels get admonished?
Let me guess.
Come on.
Shavuot.
Very good. Why do the angels get admonished on Shavuot? Because here's the background story. God says, I'm going to give the Torah to the Jewish people. Who argues? The angels. The angels say, Moshe ascended to heaven to receive the tablets, and the ministering angels said, Master of the universe, just yesterday, the Jews were worshiping the golden calf. And now you're going to give them the Torah? So this is to pick up the second pair of tablets. Right? So Hashem says to them, when you descended to visit Abraham, did you not eat meat and milk together? Tells the angels.
Where's that written?
This is from the Medrash, Tehillim, chapter 8. Did you not give the meat and milk together? As it is written, he took cream and milk and the calf that he prepared, and he placed it before them, and they ate. Big boo-boo, big no-no. However, when a Jewish child returns home from school and his mother offers him bread, meat, and milk to eat, he will say to her, today my teacher taught me that it says in the Torah not to eat meat with milk. So, God says, you angels are claiming that we shouldn't give it to the Jews because they're human. They're fallible. They're fallible. They make mistakes. We should give it to angels because angels are perfect. They never sin. Okay. God says, hey, what about the time that you went to Abraham's tent? You definitely ate something you weren't supposed to eat. You ate meat and milk together. The angels had nothing to respond.
Was it some form of Hashem, one of those three? That's the whole right before Sodom and Gomorrah type issue, right? I thought that to some degree one of the was. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right, that's next.
Yes, that was an angel.
And I thought one of the three was
an angel that came to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah.
So wasn't Hashem in an image in any way, shape, form, or anything? Okay.
No, 3 angels.
Okay.
Okay. So we have quite an interesting dilemma here. And this background really understands and explains to us that they actually did something wrong according to this. They did something wrong when they ate in Abraham's tent. They ate meat and milk together. So what do we see from this? That Abraham served meat and milk together. So the obvious question is, how is this possible? If Abraham was a man who understood and had been given some of these traditions before they were given on Mount Sinai, and such an ardent believer in God, why would he serve meat and milk together? Doesn't make sense. Am I right?
I'm just waiting for the hook.
Something doesn't make sense.
Right.
Well, we've got to understand each
Absolutely.
stage for what it is. Question is a question, and an answer is an answer. My teacher used to say that even after you answer a question, it's still a question. Question will always remain if it's a good question. All right. So the first explanation is that we don't necessarily see that they did anything wrong. It doesn't say that they ate cheese together with meat in the same dish. If you look closely, it says Avram fetched the cheese and the milk and the calf that he prepared, and he placed it before his guests. First, he offered the cheese and the milk, and then the meat. You can eat meat after milk. It's not the same as eating milk after meat. Like it says in the Code of Jewish Law, if one first ate meat, he can't subsequently eat cheese until he waits 6 hours. You have to wait after eating meat 6 hours before you can eat meat. And even if he waited, he still has to wash his mouth. However, after eating cheese, you can eat meat immediately as long as you just wash your hands and your mouth. So, we don't know that they actually did anything wrong. Abraham's totally in the clear. Totally in the clear. The only problem is, what's the problem now that we've rectified Abraham's status? We've clarified this boo-boo.
First, we're not sure it still is, but if it isn't, and everything's fine, then why does Hashem bring it up in the explanation later?
So what did the angels do wrong?
So what did the angels do?
What did the angels do wrong? So if say Abraham was right, why were the angels wrong? And it's a perfectly good question. So to understand what took place, we have to understand what is the problem with eating milk and meat together. What is the difficulty between eating milk and meat together? Now, this is prefaced on our belief that kosher is a spiritual diet to feed our spiritual identity. It's not about health. You can eat a cheeseburger and live a perfectly healthy life. You might have cholesterol problems, right? Not a problem with health. It's related to your spiritual identity. So what is the spiritual problem with eating milk and meat together? Furthermore, why is it that eating the milk and then the meat is okay, whereas eating the meat and then the milk is not okay? Is it something just as basic as I have to make sure that it's out of my system, it's not in my throat? That seems more of like a physical issue. If you're telling me that it has spiritual ramifications as well, what are the spiritual ramifications to eating the meat first or the milk first? And through understanding these different forces and understanding what meat represents and what milk represents, we'll better understand why on Shavuot, when we celebrate the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, we choose to eat milk and dairy. So, in Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, it teaches us that everything in this world has an energy, a godly life force. You have an energy, a soul, and so does the chair and the table, and every other creation in the world around us has an energy inside of it. That energy gives it life. If that energy were to cease to exist for just a moment, the item would cease to exist. Period. The energy leaves, the item ceases to exist. Because we believe that Hashem exists in this world all around us and is constantly giving life and energy to the world on a regular basis. On an absolute regular basis. To bring in an analogy, if you have a phone, and I have my hand under the phone, right? If I take away my hand, what will happen? The phone will fall. Why will the phone fall? Because naturally, the phone is not supposed to stay suspended in the air. The natural position of the phone, or the natural gravitation of the phone, is to pull down to the earth. That's the way things are naturally. Same too in the creation of the world. None of these things would truly be here. Where did the table come from? Where did the chair come from? You believe that God created it, but before he created it, it didn't exist. So its natural state of existence is non-existence. God came along and he changed that. But when you make that kind of change and you're trying to break that natural state of existence, it needs to be constant. And the minute that you take away your hand, it reverts back to its natural state. Same too, you remove the godly energy, reverts back to its natural state of non-existence. So that's what it means that Hashem is personally involved in our lives, not just in all of the details, but actually involved in giving us life on a regular basis. It's actually not really relevant to the discussion, but it's a very crucial point in how you look at your relationship with your Creator. You look at it as God created me, even if I believe in creationism. God created me thousands and thousands of years ago, and for that I am truly grateful, but his involvement in my everyday life is subsequent at best. All right, so let's go back to our milk and our meat. Milk is from the side of chesed, kindness. What side is chesed?
Right.
Right, very good. The easy way to remember that is that most people are righties. So most people tend to use their right in this mode of kindness. Milk is from the side of chesed, kindness, and meat represents gevura, or severity. Why? The reasoning of the prohibition against mixing meat and milk is because it is similar to mixing or crossbreeding fruit. Similarly, it is forbidden to mix meat and milk together because we cannot mix together spiritual powers. The meaning of his words is meat is red, representing sternness, while milk signifies compassion. Okay, so you're not supposed to crossbreed. God created the world in a specific way, and we should use that model of creation in our everyday life. We don't need to reinvent and recreate different species. Same too when it comes to meat and milk. We're eating for our spiritual energy, and these two spiritual energies do not mix. They do not clash. Meat representing the energy of severity or sternness, and milk representing an energy of kindness or positivity and giving. And why? Because meat is red. Red is a color that represents something that's severe or harsh. And milk is a liquid, first of all, which is constantly flowing, constantly looking to spread itself out as far as it can get, which is a concept of kindness, not holding back, but rather giving. And also, what color is it? White. Pure, simple, definitely not the same aggression or same passion that red expresses. Another connection between the concept of kindness and milk is that when a mother nurses their child, right, and they give that child milk, the more they give the child, the more they get, which is totally contrary to anything else that exists in this world. Typically, the more you give, the less you have. If you have $100 and you give someone 50, you now have 50. Whether you give it to tzedakah or you give it anywhere else, generally, you give, you have less. But milk represents something completely different. The more that a woman nurses, the more supply they have. So first of all, we see the beauty of how Hashem created this system to feed a child. But even more so, we teach the child, and truly we teach the world, that the more you give, the more you will get. The more you give, the more you will have to give. Just like a nursing supply. Same system. So again, we see another connection between milk and giving, kindness. When you're kind to someone, it doesn't come at your expense. The more kind you are, the more kindness you'll receive and you'll feel in your lifetime. Because the more you open yourself up to that trait, the more you're going to experience it. The more closed you are, the less you're going to experience. So both elements, kindness and severity, meat and milk, are important and integral in developing a healthy balance, a healthy character. Too much of either one is problematic. Let's look at that for a second, because it's actually extremely relevant now that we're counting the Omer, we're counting the time before Shavuot, and hopefully changing our character every day just a little bit more. So, if someone only has kindness or chesed and doesn't experience any boundaries, any limitations, they become very easily an enabler. An enabler. Whatever their child wants, yes, honey, here you go, no problem. And pretty soon they are actually hurting that person instead of helping them, because they are enabling them and therefore not allowing them to grow and become truly independent and self-reliant, especially when it comes to bad behaviors. Someone is experiencing bad behaviors and you come along and you simply assist them without recognizing any boundaries. You are becoming part of the problem. Although you may say to yourself, I'm helping out, I'm being kind, I'm being generous, I'm giving. But sometimes giving without any logical, with any logical standards can actually be harmful more than helpful. So kindness has to be tempered. It has to be tempered by gevura or severity. And gevura is boundaries, limitations. Up till here and no further. Because if we had no limitations, then we wouldn't really have kindness. We wouldn't have anything. There would be no distinction and definition between what is you and what is me. It would just be me spreading myself everywhere and doing whatever I want. We would lose all definition. And eventually, we wouldn't be in a position to sustain our existence, because we would simply give up being who we are by simply doing whatever people asked of us. So therefore, we have to find a healthy balance between giving, but also recognizing up until what point, where we are, how far we can go, and how far we can't go. And when we do that, when we recognize and understand our limitations, we become more focused and therefore more effective. That's ultimately what the goal is. So you have to have kindness tempered with severity. Mix the two together, and you have a recipe for success. Now, even though they need and require a balance between the two of them, and one helps and feeds and focuses the other, the foundation, the cornerstone, the bedrock, has to be chesed. It has to be the kindness. It has to be the love, the sensitivity. That is the first character trait. That's why it's the first. Chesed, then gevura. Then goes the severity. Once we've established the love, the compassion, the caring, then we can start to pull back when the time comes and says, whoa, if I truly care about this person, I can't go that far. But if you start the other way around, if all your interactions are based around your gevura, your severity, don't do this, don't do that, don't go here, you're not going to be very effective. And your relationship will eventually die out. So while we have to have a balance between the two, the foundation has to be built on chesed, on kindness, on love, on genuine interest between you and the other person. I truly care about that person. Because the reality is that as teachers, as parents, as educators, we often know that sometimes we express severity, we rebuke our children, we scold them, we punish them, not from a position of love, but rather from a position of aggression, frustration. So that's why we start with chesed to say, wait, before you go on to severity, before you start to get all stern and strict, ask yourself this. Have you shown kindness to this person? Do you really care about this person? Do you love this person? If the answer is yes, and gevura will be effective, go for it. 2 feet. But if the answer is no, it's time to take a step back and reevaluate. When it comes to, as the Rebbe would write, when it comes to educating a child, the right hand that brings near should come before the left hand that pushes away. As we see vividly, if one begins dealing with the child in a manner that the left hand pushes away, this may push him away from learning altogether. So we have to be extremely prudent to make sure that we have a balance, but love and care truly pervade everything that we do. So now that we understand a little bit about why meat and milk don't mix, right? We have a bit of an understanding, and we understand their spiritual forces and energies and how each one is important but distinct and different. Let's talk about the waiting periods, because we know that when it comes to waiting between meat and milk, we have two different scenarios. One requiring us to wait 6 hours, and one saying we could just wash our hands in our mouth. What is the difference between whether the meat goes first or the milk goes first? So to understand this and explain it further, there's a principle that we have to introduce. And this is a principle that's talked about in the Talmud about having kosher and non-kosher food together. Excuse me. Kosher and non-kosher food together, touching each other. Does the non-kosher food make the kosher food non-kosher? That's the case that's brought in the Talmud. If something hot falls into something cold, and I'm quoting from the Talmud, or vice versa, the cold item falls into the hot one. Rav says that the upper one always overpowers, and Shmuel says that the lower one always overpowers. So we have an argument. What else is new? One rabbi says that whatever was on the bottom transforms the two, and the other one says whatever's on top transforms the two. Meaning, if this is kosher and non-kosher food falls on top, the bottom one overrules the top one or not? That's what they're arguing about. If you say the bottom one overrules and the bottom one is kosher, then everything stays kosher. Even though it was non-kosher meat, we say that the bottom one ultimately nullified the top one. If cold meat falls into hot milk or cold milk falls into hot meat, both become fully prohibited because the heat of the lower food always overpowers and heats up the coldness of the top food. So, Code of Jewish Law comes and answers. The answer is like Mr. Shmuel. Whatever is on bottom ultimately reigns supreme. And if the kosher food is on bottom, then the entire pot is kosher because hot air rises. Right? Hot air rises, so therefore the bottom thing that's kosher, the hot air will go up and it will ultimately transform or infuse itself inside of that non-kosher food, therefore nullifying that non-kosher piece of meat. Now we can understand why is it that we have to eat milk first, we can eat meat right away. Milk first means kindness first, right? Milk is chesed. So if the kindness is the first thing, which it's supposed to be, there's no problem to go into the severity. Because even when we move to being stern and being logical and rational and putting up borders with our family and our friends, our foundation is kindness. We're not worried that we're going to do it for the wrong reasons or act out of rage or anger or frustration because our foundation is chesed. We started with chesed. That came first. And just like the rule, the bottom overpowers the top. The first step ultimately overpowers and defines the subsequent steps that come later. So if chesed is number one, is the first step, it's just like that kosher food that was on bottom of the pot, remember? Mm-hmm. It will ultimately focus the steps that follow. And it will control and focus that next step of severity, of boundaries and limitations that will follow in the relationship. So no waiting period is required. However, what happens in the opposite case? You eat meat first. If you eat meat first and you start off, your relationship starts off on a severe note, on a limited, restricted note, without necessarily the foundation of kindness and compassion, now you have more of a concern. Now you have a concern. If you take this severity and you run straight into kindness or you try to do something else, you're going to be ineffective. You're going to be ineffective. So you have to give time for the severity to calm itself down. Allow it to dissipate a little bit before you can move on and start to be kind and compassionate and so on and so forth. So that way, when you're kind and compassionate, you do it for the right reasons, not based on the severity that prefaced it. Again, meat is severity. Meat is limitations and boundaries. So if you want to eat meat first, if you start off with your boundaries and your limitations, and you run from that straight over to kindness, you will be ineffective in being truly kind. because you won't be able to get over the harsh realities that you've already established in your mind about this person. You've already put up blockades, limitations, coming from the severity represented by the meat. Now you try to show kindness and compassion to this person, it's going to be very difficult because you're all confused by the severity that you had held up previously. So what do? You wait 6 hours. You allow some of that severity, some of those boundaries and limitations you've set up for this individual to calm, to ease. And then you re-explore that relationship, albeit this time from a compassionate, caring, and sensitive position. Second time, is it try?
It's just, one, the timing is very relevant to
Okay.
what you and I talked about.
Okay.
Second is adding this understanding, again, makes the reason for observing this so much different than if you didn't have this understanding.
Absolutely. But we understand the waiting time.
Yes.
It makes sense now.
Absolutely.
So we now understand a little bit why we wait specifically from meat to milk and not necessarily from milk to meat. Okay? And now that we understand that, we can go back to the story and hopefully answer the question, what did the angels do wrong? Remember, this was our question.
I'm trying to think back.
What did the angels do wrong? They ate milk and then ate meat, following the rules, right? So Abraham was fine, but the angels were admonished. Why were the angels admonished? So what were the angels' argument, right? Let's fast forward. It's Shavuot. Torah is being given on Mount Sinai. Moses comes back up. He's going to get the Torah, the whole bit. It's being given to the Jews, and the angels are mad. They're angry. Why are they angry? Because they say Jews are flawed. They say Jews are flawed. They say that it's not what happened on the bottom that ultimately transforms. It's what happens on top that ultimately transforms. Their point being that heaven, which is higher than the earth, heaven is where it's really at. And if you give the Torah to heaven, that will ultimately sprinkle down and will affect the earth as well. Contrary to the concept that was brought in the Talmud, that what ultimately transmits itself, bottom to top.
So he was admonishing them, going, listen, when you had the meal with Abraham, you didn't recognize what the whole concept there was? So he was not saying that that was wrong what they did. He was saying they didn't recognize the value of what they did or the concept of what they did.
Furthermore, you're right, but furthermore, they contradicted themselves. They contradicted themselves by what they ate. If they believe that it's top down and not bottom up, right? Exactly. Then you're not allowed to eat meat after milk. You have to wait 6 hours. Because if you have meat after milk, then the meat is still going to define the milk. It's top, right? Redefining bottom.
No, if you have milk after meat.
Sorry.
If you have milk after
If you have milk after meat.
I passed the test, he was just checking me.
No, you did very well. So the fact that they were following our rules, that the bottom governs, that was the biggest expression that deep down the angels realized that where was the Torah meant to be given? Down here in this world. The Torah was designed for human beings of flesh and blood. They realized it themselves. They weren't happy about it. They're very sad to see the Torah be given to the Jewish people because it's a lost opportunity. It's a lost opportunity. It says, there's another medrash that says every time a soul is created and sent down to the earth, the angels cry. But the reality is that soul is going on a tremendous task and a tremendous mission to come down to this earth. So now we see that this story of eating dairy on Shavuot is not an afterthought. It's not based merely on the fact that the Jews ate dairy when they didn't know how to eat meat. or that dairy equals 40 and Moses was up for 40 days. No. This is a fundamental concept connected with the entire definition of the holiday. Shavuot is about recognizing that we earthlings in this world were given the Torah. Not angels, earthlings. Human beings that make mistakes, we were given the Torah. Because change in all of the realms of the universe start here, with you and with me. That's what Shavuot is about. That's what we're celebrating. We're celebrating that God chose human beings. And he chose the Jewish people for an even more unique task. But in general, he chose human beings. He chose us to bring about transformation in all the worlds. And whatever's happening up there with angels, with all of that, he decided that the bottom will rule. This is a grassroots campaign that God initiated. It's bottom up, not top down. It's true. That's what we celebrate. And that's an amazing potential and an amazing responsibility that comes with that. When I do a mitzvah, it's not just about what I'm doing, me, maybe my family, you might even argue my community, Tampa, or my state, or my country, or even the world. People always talk about tikkun olam, right? Tikkun olam, tikkun olam. Tikkun olam doesn't even tell you the whole bit of it. Because tikkun olam is talking about repairing this world. But in reality, you are bringing about change and transformation in all of the worlds. That's what you celebrate on Shavuot. When you get the Torah on Mount Sinai, you're not only celebrating the fact, hey, we've got rules, we've got restrictions, got obligations. That would make it a very difficult holiday. Strenuous. Oh, this is so stressful. I have to be reminded. Why would I want to go to the cheesecake party with Mehdi? Even though the cheesecake is delicious, from Dina, right? Why would I want to go? I want to be reminded, oh, there's 10 commandments and there's 613 mitzvahs, and I'm only doing a fraction of them. I don't want to be reminded of that. No, that is not what Shavuot is about. Shavuot is about being reminded of the tremendous potential that God has given us, that Hashem has given us here in this world, chosen us over angels, over everything else, to bring about this transformation. And yes, it's not easy, and yes, it's not perfect, but we're at the bottom, and it starts with us. And I think if we internalize that message, we can ultimately walk away from Shavuos confident, inspired, and motivated to truly go out and say to myself, hey, the world's plural, everything is relying on me. I'm the one that has to get this done. I can't pass the buck. I can't be lazy. I can't take a day off. There's too much at stake. I have tremendous power, and I have to use it out. And I think that confidence hopefully pushes us through the summer, because we're beginning a summer period now, and the summer tends to be lax. We don't have the focus or the formality of work as much. We tend to relax a little bit. Some of us take a vacation. And we start to think to ourselves, well, it's okay. No one's really looking out. If I just take a couple of days off, nothing's going to stop. The world will continue running. Don't make that mistake. You have been chosen for a task. You have that obligation, that responsibility, that opportunity. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. Use it. And you will find tremendous confidence and satisfaction and appreciation that God chose you and made you who you are today. So, of course, I know that you're listening to this conversation. You will be joining us this Sunday, May 27th at 5:30 p.m. at Chabad House for our annual Cheesecake Party and reading of the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments. You can find more information on our website at ChabadSouthTampa.com or on Facebook, and you can RSVP at either location. I want to thank you for tuning in tonight. Next week's class will not be held Monday night because Monday night will still be the holiday. So stay tuned for when next Monday's class will be. It will have to be rescheduled. Thank you for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.